Welcome to the Media Roundtable Special Edition. I'm your host, Dan Granger, but I'm not really hosting. We're going to play for you a very special rebroadcast of a conversation that we had a few months back at Podcast Movement Evolutions. As always, we are here in service of the Chief Audio Officer. That is that special individual who is tasked with finding success in audio through advertising. So we decided, instead of us just talking about the Chief Audio Officer, why don't we spend more time talking to the Chief Audio Officer? And we actually had a panel at Podcast Movement Evolutions, which was here in beautiful and safe downtown LA, where we got two advertisers that we've known for a long time to sit down and talk about their view of the business. What do brands want? What does the Chief Audio Officer want? What are the problems that they're running into? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And what do they love about this channel? And the two individuals are really special people. Kezia Koo, who is Senior Director of Global Employer Performance Marketing at Indeed. She's been at a number of different interesting companies that have been active in the audio space, but in her capacity in Indeed, she's overseeing a significant campaign that is multifaceted, and her perspectives are really important. We also have Robbie Giles, who is Vice President of Performance and Lifecycle Marketing at MasterClass. His insights are incredible, and what I liked about the conversation is neither of them pulled any punches and just kind of spoke very directly. You know, when I talk to people who listen to this program, usually I find out that even though it's programmed for the Chief Audio Officer, there's a lot of people in the industry that want to hear that perspective. And so take this as a loving, but in some cases, slightly confrontational conversation about, like, look, here's where we're messing up. Here's where we can do better. So I think you're really going to enjoy some of the topics to listen up for are things like, you know, from the perspective of a marketer on the brand side, where does audio fit in the media landscape? And when they're looking across channels, how do they make the decision to push a dollar into this space versus another? What are those trades and what are some of the bottlenecks and barriers? We also talk about some of the pressures going on in the macro business environment right now and the importance of accountability. And we touch on things that, you know, most marketers are facing right now, like the struggle, which is real in brand safety and suitability, and how you can apply that stuff to an audio campaign. So let's dive in.
Welcome to Podcast Movement Evolutions 2024.
This is going to happen. Find a good spot. It's hard to have a movement if you don't have sponsors. I think about the kind of hierarchy or the pyramid of, you know, how decisions get made in this industry, and you kind of have, you know, creators, publishers, maybe agencies, but brands really, I think, fundamentally determine the success of the industry. I think they tell us what's possible, how much can we grow, what is our value, and, you know, how big can we get. So one of the things we wanted to bring to this conference was a little more perspective from the brands about what they want, what makes them successful. I think we all have a lot of ideas about what we'd like that we think would make them successful, but there's nothing like hearing directly from the people that are responsible for the results of their campaigns. We call him the Chief Audio Officer at Oxford Road as a way of just kind of describing the person who really is accountable for the work that all of us do. So I've asked a few of our friends to join us to participate in this conversation, and thank you all for making time to listen to what they have to say. To my left is Kezia Koo. Kezia is Senior Director of Global Employer Growth Marketing at Indeed. Kezia has been at this. She's been in the game for a long time. Growth marketing for 20 years, Amazon, Chegg, Zulily, Kaplan. She's done all of it. And not just audio, so she has an interesting perspective across channels. And then Robbie Giles, also to my left. Robbie oversees all advertising and lifecycle marketing for MasterClass. Prior to MasterClass, Robbie was a Disney guy and also Fandango, where he led performance marketing. So will you welcome these folks for making the time to leave? They're busy. Thank you. Look at that. You guys are popular already. Good job. All right. Great session. We'll do some softballs first. How about that? Guys, when did you find out that podcasts were a thing? Do you remember?
Probably Serial.
Serial.
Was when I started paying attention.
Right at the start.
Probably that. So what was that, 2014?
Yeah, 14.
I guess, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it was 2013, 2014.
Yeah. We brag because we launched in 2013, so we're like, we were pre-Serial. And just because I think people are always interested, you've got a lot of people on the content side in this room. What are the shows that you guys actually listen to? Because I think, wouldn't it be great if you knew what the brands actually like to consume themselves, as listeners?
I guess I can go first. Mine might be a little bit more boring, but I like a lot of news, and so I don't get enough of the right kind of news on TV, and so I lean into a lot of storytelling. So I do a lot of NPR, a lot of Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, and then my sort of fun side is I actually really love Formula One, and so I listen to a much longer Formula One podcast. It's usually 1 to 2 hours every couple of weeks, and so actually today I was listening to my Formula One recap of last week's race in Australia. And so that's me.
Mine, I think, were mostly sports and like curiosity based. So I've found myself, listening to a lot of The Ringer, listening to Bill Simmons. Everything kind of spawns off from that, and then Plain English with Derek Thompson is one of my favorites as well.
Super cool. All right, so before we get really deep into the advertising piece in audio specifically. We had a conversation a few weeks back with Jason Kalkanis where he described the current business climate as the age of efficiency, that's what we're all dealing with right now. I think we all feel it. You're all hearing the themes in these sessions. Things are competitive right now. Nobody's got their feet up. Everybody's hustling. Everybody's fighting for every dollar, and I don't think it's just media. In your businesses, how are you adapting the work that you do as a marketer to the current business environment?
Yeah, I think since 2020, right, media in general, not just podcasts, but saw an enormous spike because we as human beings didn't have much else to do other than listen to shows and watch TV, right? So I think that resulted in a lot more time spent consuming media, all different types of media. It resulted in a lot of VCs getting really excited about that and flooding a lot of money in, which again creates more inventory, more demand to then fulfill that inventory, which created a lot of, I think, misperceptions or maybe just temporary truths right around what can drive business. And what I can say is right now, the things that catch my attention are not like being the first to try something or, hey, we created this brand new integration. It costs $200,000. You want to do it? No, because I haven't advertised on the show before, so why would I spend $200,000, right, before getting a taste of whether it can work? So right now, I mean, we're probably no different than Indeed and every other advertiser, or most other advertisers, where it's all about results, like cost per results. For us, we're a subscription business. We charge an annual subscription, so it's the cost of getting someone to pay at least $120 to sign up for MasterClass. So everything we do, we want to get as close as possible to answering how much did it cost to drive a subscription, and our decisions are entirely going to be based upon how efficient that is. And that wasn't necessarily the case a few years ago. You think, oh, it's obvious. Well, not necessarily. Like marketing teams, advertising teams, you have experimental budgets. That's what's usual is kind of carving off a percentage of your advertising budget and say, hey, we're going to try new stuff. In general, the percentage that is taken up across multiple companies, multiple industries has drastically decreased, right? Where it used to be 10%, maybe it's 1%, 2%. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore for certain companies. So I think those are dollars that, again, have been taken out of the market or not taken out, but kind of refocused, and there's a bit of a correction there. I think that everybody's experiencing.
Sad but true. productive, though. Kezia, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think, gosh, I mean, it's such a tough time for marketers. I mean, I think to your point, things have really changed. And I think, what we are tasked with doing hasn't really changed. I think the condition under which we get that done is what's changed. And so I think if you're a marketer and you're being tasked with acquiring new customers, you still have to find how am I going to reach those customers and attract them as cost efficiently as possible. If you're a marketer who's tasked with engaging customers, like you've got to protect your business. You've got to ensure that whatever customer base you have, like you don't lose them to your competition. And so what are the most effective ways of keeping that customer engaged? Some marketers are also driving revenue. I mean, you still have to make money. Maybe you're not making as much money as you did 5, 6, 7 years ago, but you got to figure out, how do I support the business and drive revenue? How do I impact margins? Like how do I keep costs down? And so I think efficiency is life. And I think the way I think about it is that it's both short-term and long-term. So I think maybe 5, 7 years ago, there were conversations around, well, as long as it drives long-term efficiency, we're okay with maybe losing some money or being inefficient in the short term. That's not a conversation I've heard in a number of years. You've got to be efficient in the short term and the long term. And so it's not even a question of losing money or sacrificing. It's like the numbers always have to make sense. And I think as a marketer, you're trying to protect your marketing mix. And so I think if you have a sense as to what works, you're going to make sure you keep on investing in that. You're probably going to sacrifice, but you're going to pick and choose where you sacrifice. And so I think as a marketer, no matter what the conditions are, I don't want to lose those properties, those podcasts, those shows that I know work for me. I want to make sure I protect that, because the last thing you want to do is lose something that really works. And I just think like it's really important for marketers to really think about being both effective at what they do, as well as really being efficient. And I think we're at a place where I know everybody wants to make money, but we got to figure out how to create shared value. And I think don't just see the advertiser as just a lot of money sitting there, because we've got to think about how to reach our audience. And I think if pricing is high, we're probably going to choose something that's a little bit more cost effective, because we're thinking, hey, like if the cost to reach an audience is high, maybe let's choose a different show. And so I think, for the people in this room who set prices, consider how you're setting some of those prices, because if the investment is higher, then that presents us with more risk. And so if we're testing something, most likely it has to work. And if it doesn't work, we're going to move and try something else. But if it's a little bit cheaper for us, a little bit more cost effective, and it doesn't work, well, then we'll try it again and we'll iterate and we'll be more patient. And so I think when you set prices high, potentially we've got to make different choices. And so just remember, it's not a zero-sum game. Like we're all playing a different part of this equation. And I think as marketers now, we've got to really make sure how we're making that budget to put as far as possible.
It's so funny to hear this, because no matter how, global brand, indeed. This is not a small company. And I remember selling local radio. Gary's in the room somewhere. We have this joke that every brand we ever talk to, but we're talking about like local businesses, they'd always say the same thing. What's the least we can spend to test it? If it works, we'll spend more. It's the same thing. 20 years I've been doing this. The story hasn't changed, and it doesn't seem to matter whether you're, a mortgage company down the block or you're a global brand doing every type of media imaginable. So that's definitely consistent.
We're global too, Dan.
I know you are. Yeah, you guys are huge. So most of us in this room are specialized in audio, though, right? And I feel like sometimes we're like kids pulling on your pant leg going, look at me, pay attention to me. And you've got to manage all these competing interests, right? And we can, I think, sometimes be all we think about. But there's a big world out there, and you guys have to decide when you're going to put $1 over here, not to put $1 over here, here, and here. So when you look at audio across the landscape, where does it fit in? How do you think about it? What is the profile of it as you see it relative to the other channels you guys are dealing with? Because you're both dealing with multiple channels.
I guess I can start. Audio is important. I can think of all my marketing career, audio has always been part of the mix. It's always been an essential part now, and sometimes it's radio, sometimes it's streaming audio, sometimes it's podcast, but audio is always there. And I think the reason for that is because my target consumer, audio is important to them. And so I've been at companies where we start with the customer. And so the customer is extremely important to us. And so I need to be where my customer is and where they're consuming. And so they've always consumed audio. And so therefore it's always been an important channel for me. I think stepping back, it's important. in terms of like advertising, like I need to think about like a lot of different elements. And so one, like, is it a safe place for my brand to be? Because just because my consumer is there, it's not always safe for the brand. And so is it safe? Can I target my audience? Is my audience, does it embrace marketing? Does it embrace advertising? Is it responsive? Have other brands been successful in sort of reacting to ads and driving revenue? Is it fairly straightforward to place a buy and to measure the campaign? And so I think for us, audio has always been part of the mix. And I think as long as the consumers continue to lean in and engage, and you all have that control in this room because you all are creating the content, right? And some of you are partners where you're helping with targeting, et cetera. And so I think for us, it is an important channel for us, and I think it will continue to be important as long as the customer is there, as long as the customer spends hours every single month engaging, as long as they lean in and trust the content creators and their voices, we'll be there. And so I think we follow where the customer is at. So I think it's up to you all to keep them engaged and keep on growing the space.
I would say it's probably of all the channels, probably medium, I would say, importance. I would say if I was asked 2 or 3 years ago when we were setting our CAC targets based on 5-year LTVs instead of 2-year LTVs, which Kezia kind of mentioned, I probably would have said high because I would have been more focused on growth, whereas right now it's really about what is driving immediate return, right? And I think we've, again, found audio, there are some struggles, again, to get it to meet the 2-year CAC goals we have as opposed to 5. I'd say the role that it plays, though, for our business in particular, it's just the value of hearing somebody explain a personalized experience, right? And the value of MasterClass. I think one of the struggles we have is kind of getting people to understand what is MasterClass. Like, are there lessons on everything? Do I get a subscription to everything? Is it all you can eat? Is it to a specific class? Like, we used to sell individual classes when the company was starting 9, 10 years ago. Right, understanding, again, are there assignments I can take? Can I watch on my phone? Things like that, right? Is it really worth the money? We charge an annual subscription. So audio, right, when we just think about what the medium is. When you're buying on TV, you're buying on a TV show, you don't get the host going on, right, the commercial break and talking about why the product is so great. When you buy influencer marketing, the biggest question I always have is, like, is this person actually influential? Right? It's very easy to get a 3-second view. Like, are they used to talking about products? But so I think the podcast is very unique, right, in that respect, and we do see some value there with kind of really being able to extol the virtues of a product, and sort of the more personalized those reads are, right, we tend to see better return. So.
Just to add one thing from Robbie, like, that is so a good point you're pointing out, because I think for us, like, that time to explain the product and the services and the benefits is so important, because I think for places where you're in a really competitive space, oftentimes the audience can't differentiate. Podcast gives you enough time to really talk about why you, company A, are different from company B and C. And I feel like that's something you can't do in paid search and some of the other channels as well. And I really love audio for that. And also the host is obviously reading the spots, and it comes across as an endorsement. And so it just feels a little bit more authentic. And so I think there's some real great nuggets and value that separates audio from other channels, which I love.
Wonderful. And so you both kind of touched on where I was going with this already, but I think, we know that an audio opportunity is going to be judged by typically the response that you get, the return on investment, right? But as a shorthand in your mind, when you look at opportunities or you see something you tried that didn't work, what do you imagine are the primary drivers of the success or failure of a campaign?
I think it's just all the creative, in my opinion. I mean, it's, again, you get to, of course, rates matter, right? If I believe that with the best creative, it will drive sales, right? And so the more personalized something is, the more authentic something sounds coming from a host. I think it was Michael in the last session talked about segues, right? Like, that's part of what makes it personalized, what makes it engaging. If it's tougher to sort of differentiate when the content stops and when the ad starts, people tend to be listening a bit more, right? The message hits home a little harder. So for us, it's entirely just how customized, how personalized are those reads, and do you believe the person saying it, right? If you don't believe them, then it's really no different than any other sort of spot I can get on TV, and then you're dealing with the disadvantage of the fact that maybe the person will just click 15 seconds ahead, or you don't have the sort of visual medium, right, to keep them engaged. So Yeah, hopefully that answers.
So, Robbie, I want to follow up on that. So much of what I hear you talking about is about the authenticity and the personalization aspect. You go to this conference, and it feels to me that our industry is really trying to move away from that in many ways. Like, everything is about programmatic tech. How do we dynamically insert more ads? How do we make sure we track the ads we're dynamically inserting? What does that make you think about the industry? Does it make it like more appealing? Does it seem like a both and?
It doesn't inherently make it less appealing. I think for the numbers that we've seen, my suspicion is that based on the numbers that I see, again, that those spots are probably going to be less impactful, and the conversion rate of those spots and getting someone to buy a product is going to be lower. Therefore, because I'm looking at cost per results, the price better be lower. And if the price isn't lower, then it's probably not going to work for me, and I'm probably not going to buy those spots. I'm probably going to favor more of the, whatever you want to call them, baked-in reads.
Yeah.
Baked-in reads.
Save the live reads. Kezia, what do you think?
I guess so much of my world is new customer acquisition, and so I think if I'm presented with some data and it says that it's not working, I often think, well, maybe my existing customers are leading into this particular portfolio, and maybe we need to figure out where the new customers are. And so I think when I look at podcasts, it's really supplementing the rest of our buy, and so I'm not looking to use it as a reach play, meaning that I'm not looking to hit my existing audience in new spots. I'm looking for places where I'm reaching people that I can't reach elsewhere, and so that means my buy might look different. It might be 300 small shows versus 10 big shows, but I'm really looking for that incremental, that extra audience. And so usually when something doesn't work, I ask myself, did it drive traffic? Did it drive people to visit the website? And oftentimes it does, but they didn't really convert. And so that just tells me they either weren't ready to spend or potentially it's existing customers. And so I tend to be fairly patient. We test things time and time again, as long as it's affordable. But generally speaking, like on top of the creative, I often ask myself, maybe our audience isn't there, or it's not audience ready to spend, because I'm in a space where we are looking for business leaders, and we're looking for them to use Indeed as their hiring partner. And so if you are a job seeker, for example, that doesn't help part of what I work on specifically. It helps Indeed overall, but just maybe not my portfolio. And so I think I often see, we call it a halo, where we have one intended audience, but then another audience actually reacts. And so oftentimes we'll see job seekers and other people react to the ads, but I kind of need those HR decision makers to be the ones reacting to the ads. And so that just usually means I need to find maybe a different show and just change the mix a little bit.
So in podcasts, we have this feature about measuring downloads, right? Which I feel like is a little bit like print talking about circulation versus actual, impressions, right? How does it cause issues for you guys when you're trying to line up all the different things that you're doing? Like, how much extra work do you have to do because of the nature of the way that it's measured?
It just makes it more confusing, I think, when you're looking at impressions for different channels and they mean different things. I think, obviously, with Google and Facebook and some of these other digital platforms, there's a bit more uniformity or consistency in what those metrics mean. With podcasts, when it's like, well, downloads, okay, but did someone actually listen to it? Well, I don't know. And did they skip past it? Well, I don't know. Like, okay. You're looking at these numbers, like, okay, well, it's more caveats, right? The more caveats you have to list with numbers, and it's kind of like, why am I looking at these numbers at all? I can just go to lunch, because we don't seem to know much, right, around what's working with these different lines. So why bother to have the numbers at a certain point? There's my little digression there.
Yeah.
That's the frustration.
Well, and honestly, that's what the industry was born out of, right? Like, there was no measurement. I'm still not sure there's measurement, but yeah, it was just like, well, we'll give you 10 grand. Let's see what it does. And if they go to our vanity URL, maybe we'll do it again, What about you, Kezia?
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember in my career so many times having to explain to folks like what something meant. And so you're right, after a while we had caveats, we had asterisks on the side. At some point we just removed podcast from some of the high level. We had the output, but we didn't have the impressions element, because at some point, you don't want to distract someone from the main message. And if they're getting caught up on something that they can't make sense, then they're losing the big picture. And so I think that's the reality of it. It's just I've removed it, and there's usually a thick line at the bottom that explains with a fat star next to it. But I think it is challenging for some folks to, especially if they're not a marketer, because oftentimes, like when you're a larger company, you aren't always speaking to marketers. Sometimes you're speaking to product engineering, finance, and so you're already having to translate marketing to a room of different leaders. And when they start to learn marketing speak, and then they see a metric that isn't what they've been taught, it feels like somehow the game's changed a bit on them. And so I think for that reason, I do tend to distract away from the downloads.
I think we're getting better at like figuring out some glossaries and definitions that different groups may or may not accept. But it seems like maybe we need like a two-sided document that it's like, these are the terms that marketers are looking at and having to explain that translate to other things. And these are the things that you need to know that are just specific to the industry we can't get around. But there is this language barrier, right? Okay, so while we're on this train, what else frustrates you about the channel? Or where are we getting in our own way from growing?
I think you'll hit a measurement.
Yeah.
So I'll hit on something softer, which is brand safety. And so I think, leaders, I think it's great when people listen to podcasts personally, because then it becomes easier to convince leadership to invest in that channel. But podcast is a bit of the wild, wild west, and they're very low barriers to entry. So anyone, for the most part, can start a show. And I know there's a lot of competition, which means that folks are always thinking about what is my next episode going to sound like. And so I think it is a risky space for a brand to be in when hosts decide that they want a cutting edge story and kind of go off topic to the general theme or description of what the kind of Apple Podcast Store says their show is. And so I think when I look back at my last 2 years, every single time I've had a red flag leadership issue around content, it has been with podcast every single time. And it's because there was a conversation or a topic, or in some cases, I won't say who it was, a guest, that it was very out of the norm for that show to have. And there was a lot of hate speech. And so it became a problem for the brand, and it caused weeks of issues internally. And so I think, every time there is something that we deem as being brand safe, it doesn't just undermine the one show, it actually undermines the entire buy. And then I have to actually remind folks that not every show is risky, because it's interesting, because if you're in TV and you watch a TV show and it's problematic, no one blames the entire TV industry. It's one show. But for some reason in podcasts, you have one bad podcast show or an episode or something that goes off the rails, and business leaders are just like, should we be investing in this space at all? Should we just use something else? And so I think I have to be very sensitive, because every time it happens, I've got to protect the entire buy, because it begs a lot of questions, and people are all wondering, well, can we have this issue somewhere else? And so I think that's the part that I think frustrates me, is that it's still so new that one bad player, one bad episode, one bad show could actually undermine like hundreds of other shows. And again, it has nothing to do with the other shows, but just to let you know, that's just how brand sensitive some companies are. I'm in a conservative space. Obviously, if you are at a company that is far more flexible, it's not going to be an issue. But for those of us who operate in more conservative spaces, we have to be very mindful of brand safety, and this comes up all the time. And it's just the reality is that people imply that if they hear a conversation and then the ad break has the brand, that the brand supports that. And then 2 seconds later, they're on X, they're somewhere else saying, hey, this brand supports XYZ. And so we have to spend time and money and PR to kind of roll things back and make our stances very clear. And so I just want to just mention that, because it unfortunately comes up more often. So I understand like folks are looking for edgy conversations. But again, when you've got a brand and big brands on your shows, please be mindful of how that brand shows up and the kind of content that are in the show.
Definitely agree with that. I was going to talk about measurement. I think, my I guess frustration right now is I think it's something that I'm positive is being worked on, and is probably going to be in a much better place in probably 3 years. Is just the closed loop attribution, right? Again, when we buy on big platforms like the Googles and Facebook, people are authenticated users are logging into those platforms. They're then purchasing. Again, I work for a direct-to-consumer site, right? So we know the email addresses, purchase information of who's buying with us. There are ways of connecting that together that give us a really good signal of what's working on that platform, and again, what is the cost of acquisition. When I think about podcasts and how people are listening to podcasts, the same potential is there. Authenticated users, right, who are using email addresses to sign in on Spotify, Apple Music, more and more on YouTube. there's a knowledge of who's listening to a spot, who's hearing it. We just need to connect that to the actual purchase to give us some true performance data, which I think will help with some of the other things we brought up here as well about pricing and inventory. It's very difficult to price inventory when you don't have a clear understanding of what it's doing for different advertisers. And some of that lack of understanding of what's actually working is probably some of that is due to brands not wanting to share. But like we were talking last night, probably a lot of it is brands don't know what's working, right? So some of these rates, it sometimes seems like are like plucked out of thin air. But I think once we can actually get some more closed loop attribution and understand which types of spots in terms of length, placement in the show, is it dynamic, is it a live read? I think that'll solve a lot of the issues we face. But again, it all just stems from measurement.
And just adding on to measurement, so let's just say you get to this great spot where you measure it and it actually works. Scalability. A lot of brands are looking for, can I double down? Can I invest more? And the reality is that there are lots of other marketing channels out there that once proven they work, scale quite nicely and quite easily. And so I think it's the other challenge is that it's hard sometimes to scale when you've got a lot of small shows, or let's say the shows are only dropping content once a week. It just makes it much more difficult. And so sometimes if you've got a smaller team, you might be thinking, well, even though this area is working, I can actually spend a lot less effort somewhere else and actually scale it up. And so I think scalability becomes kind of a second layer once you've got the measurement sorted out.
One final question. We have two global marketers on stage who understand performance, okay? You have largely an audience of people that are on the sales side. As marketers, what do you want to see flowing through your agency to you in a different way from the market that would make it more compelling for you? If you were the marketer at the publishers, what would you be doing different to make your inventory more attractive or your opportunities?
I think one of the things I mentioned earlier, right, was like I gave the example of a $200,000 buy. So I think, again, the last few years have sort of distorted our view of what the norm is in terms of advertisers, working with shows for the first time. And we kind of have this bar. There are a lot of minimums of it's $150,000 minimum to try this. Like, it's just becomes unreasonable for a lot of advertisers. So I think one would be coming up with ways to try new things and lower that bar a little bit, right? Kind of give us a little bit of an understanding of, does it perform? Is it driving success for our business? Like, believe me, all advertisers, if it works, they're going to want to spend more money. So I understand the kind of resource and overhead implications of that for publishers of how do you make that work? Because if you offer at a lower rate, you probably have a lot more people wanting to advertise with you. I guess I would counter with, isn't that a good thing? Yeah, I think that's a frustration we have. We get about a lot of things. Oh, we'd love to work with you. Here's our sponsorship for $100,000. Like, how about you just do a read first? That, absolutely we'll try that. But yeah.
I guess for me, just more new shows, more new ideas. I just think like podcast is in a great place where I think for known people, known voices, you can allow those voices to have very different conversations potentially and show different parts of who they are on podcasts. And then there's also this place for just inviting new voices, period. I've just been caught up over the last couple months just on some things that have come viral in my own personal life. And I'm like, I would have never chosen to listen or watch that video, but the creator was just so captivating. And so I think there's just a place in podcasts to just bring more people in, be more inclusive, have more voices. And I think when we have that content, we can spend more. And so sometimes we'll say, hey, where else can we buy? And it's a real slim list of options. Because once we think about brand safety and some other elements, and my brand can't be in true crime, and so there's just not a lot of options we have. And so one of the things is just bringing more voices into the space and having more great conversations and giving customers more options, because I need this space to grow so I can invest more in it. And I think that's always part of the challenge is like, wow, we would spend more if there was more to buy, more to invest, but now we're going to pivot to this other 8 channels I manage because, we've hit the ceiling of what's brand safe for us in this channel. And so I think that's like what I'd want to see more of, more great content.
More safe content, yeah, and it's so interesting.
More podcasts.
More
That's what we
podcasts,
need.
yes. 4 million is not enough. No, but the brand safe part is the hard part. That's what makes it tricky. We can have another conversation about that. And just to underscore what Robbie said, because I think as an agency, we sit in between everybody. We're dealing with it all the time. Everybody, it feels like everybody's like, hey, jump up to the second story. It's amazing up here. Why aren't you up here? And it's like, can you build us a staircase? Can you help us get to the first step, then the second step, then the third step? What is that starter opportunity that can get us to that scale? But, all the great brands that have helped build this space generally started with the dip the toe in and then see what happens. So anyway, this has been awesome. You guys have done great. Thank you so much for making the time. Thank you guys for giving them the time.
When Evolutions 2024 wraps up, that only means the fun has just begun. Because this August, we're bringing you the biggest podcast movement event ever. Join us August 19th through the 22nd for the 11th annual podcast movement, as we do it better than ever in Washington, D.C. So make plans to join us this August for the biggest week in podcasting. It's Podcast Movement 2024. We'll see you there.
So they brought the thunder. Thank you to Robbie and Kezia for allowing us to not only have the conversation at the event, but share that with you guys here in this forum. One of the key things that I took away from this conversation, and I hope a lot of other people do too, is there's so many shiny objects, and marketing, media, we can really get caught up in the new sexy opportunity with this personality or, this reach of this program. But what happens is the way that a lot of marketers are looking at the marketplace right now is they're having to explain every dollar that they spend and the impact that it's creating. We are still in this age of efficiency. And rather than trying to throw brands in at the deep end of the pool, how do we build them a staircase? How do we help them come in at the shallow side, let them know the water's warm, and work in gradually, incrementally at their comfort level? And I feel like as an agency, that's what we have to do. If you're on the publisher side or the creator side, I think you have to do the same thing. We all want to have big relationships that scale. Everybody's after that. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's different ways to get there. And if you try to do it all at once, what can happen is you can end up breaking too much in the process and never really getting to build a program that sustains. And it's no fun to have to go back to the drawing board after you had something that didn't meet expectations. So please join us in continuing to move this industry forward and to adapting to the marketplace that we're in and really listening to these brands, because we all work for them on some level, to make it easier for them to get into this channel and to grow into it. Thank you for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and use your influence for good to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion about the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road. Go to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. It is free and you will love it. And if you have any feedback for us on this program, please reach out to us. We will read it. info@mediaroundtable.com. Don't forget to listen to our sister podcast, also made by an Oxford Road member, Stu Redwine, our head of creative. It is called Ad Infinitum, and it is the leading podcast about audio-focused creative. And so you'll learn a lot there. Check it out when you have a chance. Special thanks to Kezia, to Robbie, to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One, plus all the other people that do work on this that we failed to mention. As always, influence responsibly.